Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So we're looking at Pauri 35 today. And last week we looked at the beginning of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's 5 stages of awakening, of realization. So here Guruji continues that conversation, that description. And Guru starts by confirming what he had talked about in the last verse. And Guruji gives this, the first stage, its name. And Guru says, Taram Khand Ka Eho Taram. So, Guruji is talking about the last stage here, saying that which has been mentioned, that is called Taram Khand. And this is the characteristics of that Taram Khand. This is what I've been describing are the characteristics of the first stage known as Taram Khand. Now, before we go into the meaning, it's worth looking at the spelling of the word Khand and what we mean by that word. So, if we look here, the word Khand normally has an onkar underneath it, and it can have a number of different meanings. So the word Khand means a province or a state. So a large area in a country or a large area of land belonging to a particular area. So the closest thing that we have would be something like a province or a state or a county. And the word Khand also means to take something large and break it into smaller pieces. So Khand would be small portions or small sections, and that's all the same spelling with an onkar at the end of the last letter. And finally, the word Khand has also been used in Gurbani to mean sugar, which is also something that we use in Punjabi language in certain regions today. Now, if we look at another spelling of the word Khand, where we take the onkar out, but we have a sihari on the last letter here. So usually when you have a word which begins with an onkar and that's been replaced by a sihari, then it means within that noun. So if we say that Khand with an onkar means a large piece of land or a state or a province, then with a sihari it means within that land, within that state. So when we look at the Khands, we can see that when Guru Nanak Dev Ji talks about such Khand, he uses this spelling here to mean within such Khand, within the state of such Khand Vasai Nirankar. So there Guruji uses this particular spelling with a sihari there. But here we see Taram Khand and Gyan Khand, Karam Khand and Saram Khand all spelt in a third way, which is called Mukta. It doesn't have a sihari or an onkar at the end of it. Now, so far, none of the major scholars of Japji Sahib, the most respected within Sikh, who've written the most authorized and approved satiks, have mentioned why this is spelt in this way. So the major scholars being Professor Sahib Singh, Sant Singh Maskeen, Gyani Gurbachan Singh Pindrawale, Kavi Santokh Singh, none of these have actually mentioned why. So this is a theory that I'm working on. It is something that I hope to have, once the Japji Sahib has been converted into a book, to have worked out why this particular spelling of Khand has been chosen. There are a number of theories. One is that we would take off the word Khand when it's missing a preposition word. So what that means is, normally what we mean by Taram Khand is Taram Da Khand, the land of Taram. So where you would be missing a preposition word like that, like da, Taram Da Khand, there you would indicate that that word is missing by having the onkad removed. So that's one idea. Another is that Dharam Khand is actually a double-barreled word. In English we would call it a polysyllabic word. So if we look at words like lunchbox or shoebox or postbox, the word box is attached to another bigger word. And in that particular case, the word in English doesn't normally have a gender, but any words in Punjabi or Gurmukhi or most of the North Indian languages have a gender to them. So then we would see that possibly the word like lunchbox, for example, would take the gender of the first word. So the word box would be masculine if the word lunch was masculine, but if postbox, for example, post was a feminine word, for example, then you would see that word as a feminine word. So we can see examples of that, for example, where Gurbani talks about Dharam Khand ka eho dharam, Gyan Khand ka akho karam, but then Guruji says Saram Khand ki bani jor, Saram Khand ki bani roop, and Karam Khand ki bani jor. So there we're seeing ka and ki. So we need to know which words are we deriving those masculine and feminine from. So those are all the different sort of areas that I'm going to be looking at, and hopefully when this is converted into a book we actually have the answers to some of those, because so far I've yet to see anyone provide an explanation for that. So that's just a little bit about the spelling of that word khand, because we're going to be revisiting this idea lots of different times. Now we can look at the word khand with an onkar and we can try and decide which of the three different definitions we're going to apply to understand what it is that we're talking about here. It is clearly nothing to do with sugar, so we can rule that out, and we can either say that it is a portion or a section of something. So if we see that we are talking about an entire path, and then we can say the first part of that, the first section of that is the use of the word khand, or the other use is the word khand as a land. So you are visiting 5 different lands, metaphorically speaking, to signify 5 different stages that you're going through. What's really interesting is that Gurbani is at this stage describing in detail what Dharam Khand and Gyan Khand and these different stages are. But what you'll notice is throughout the rest of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, Gurbani hardly anywhere uses this word Dharam Khand, Gyan Khand. So with the exception of Sach Khand, and even that very sparingly, what we can conclude is that even though Gurbani is now talking about these things, even though Guru Nanak Dev Ji is discussing the mechanics of awakening, that these aren't the everyday goals of a Sikh. One of the things that we have to be aware of on our own spiritual journey is that we don't start to chase after these different levels, because Gurbani has ruled out this idea that we have to try and gain different heights of spirituality. In the ways of the yoga traditions, we would see that there are very many spiritual powers that can come to you, and we talked about Riddhya and Siddhya, but again Gurbani rejects this idea that we have to chase after these things. These things will come to you, but it's not the goal of a Sikh. And the danger here is that if we make any of these khands one of our goals, then it actually adds to our ego. So what we would be saying is, I am progressing on my spiritual journey, my own spiritual awakening, and I have reached this stage. So you end up actually taking ownership, and you end up holding on to what you think is quite a noble thing to hold on to. It eventually becomes a ego. And sometimes we see that people are very much interested in how far or how much they've earned. People talk about their own kamai. How much Simran have they done? How much meditation have they done? So they're holding on to this idea that I'm somehow spiritually ahead or further than somebody else. And this is something to be aware of. So the goal of a Sikh, we can conclude by the fact that Guru Nanak Dev Ji and Gurbani hasn't talked throughout Guru Granth Sahib Ji about reaching certain levels. We can say that the goal of a Sikh is to live their life in praise of the divine and in constant remembrance or constant awareness, and this is achieved through Naam. But there should be no thought of self-gain or self-achievement or some sort of spiritual progression or self-reward. And we can look at what Guruji is actually saying here about Dharam Khand. Dharam Khand ka eho dharam. Dharam can mean divine living or the right way to live. So Dharam Khand ka eho dharam. You'll notice that the first dharam doesn't have an ankar in that line, but in the second dharam it does have an ankar in that line. So Dharam Khand, we can say those two words are joined, which is why it doesn't have an ankar. But in the last word dharam, there dharam means having a purpose. Now again, the word dharam has several different meanings. Today we generally tend to use dharam to mean religion. But in the old days, the word dharam would have been used to mean what is your purpose in life, what is your calling, what is the thing that you are meant to be doing. So for example, we would have said that for a carpenter, carpentry was his dharam. And we don't mean that that's just his job, it's just what he is, it's what he becomes. It is what his entire life becomes about. So for a teacher, teaching becomes their dharam. It's whatever you do to your fullest potential. So that's one meaning of the word dharam, the main characteristic of that person. So here Guruji is saying that what I have just described in the verse before is the main characteristic, the dharam of Dharam Khand. The main characteristic of Dharam Khand. Dharam Khand ka eho dharam. And if we summarize what we've heard in the last verse, we can see that the ordinary person in life is attached to Maya, to the physical world, to the material world. And so our ordinary lives are full of concern for ourselves, our own beings, our own lives, our own families, our own possessions. But when we start walking on this path towards realization, one of the first things is that we realize that the material world isn't the ultimate reality. That isn't the most important thing. This world is a dharamsal. So this is a temporary stopping point. This world isn't the final thing that we have to put all of our focus onto. And so we live in this world to realize our highest potential. And so what we're saying is to live in a certain way in accordance with your highest purpose is your dharam. The bunch, the saints, are the ones who are living this, and they're the ones who are beautiful. Their faces are radiant. They're living in an enlightened way.